Well, good afternoon all. My name is Dan Cass. I'm the Executive Director of Rewiring Australia. Thank you all for coming out on a warm and possibly unseasonally pleasant afternoon in Melbourne to this really incredible event put on by volunteers with a little bit of support from some enlightened companies. So it's just an incredible event. I'm so proud to be a part of it. I will start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land where we come together to save the world, the Wiradjuri and Woiwurrung people. And if I can just use the minute usually dedicated to this to just really advocate that if you know anyone in Queensland or WA who might be a wavering voice voter, give them a call. Most of the objections in the media are pretty stupid, but most people are not. And answer their questions, tell them why you're voting yes, have the very human one-to-one contact with the distant cousin or the ex-workmate or whoever it is, and people power could yet bring it over the line. So I'm not going to be speaking. We have experts here and one on the screen, my colleague Dr. Saul Griffith, so I'll be pretty brief. Rewiring Australia was started by Saul and I 2 years ago, and it's based on his economic analysis and engineering analysis of the climate problem. He's an engineer with a PhD from MIT. He's started a dozen companies, and in Silicon Valley style, a few crashed and some are big successes. And then a few years ago, he was really alarmed by climate progress or lack thereof, and did an analysis that shows what others have found also, that half or 40% of what we need to do, we can do today with technologies that are already or will soon be cheaper than fossil fuels. Why would you not do it? And the analysis in Australia is there's maybe 100 million machines over the next 20 years that we'll be buying and retiring. And if we make all of those decisions, the electric car, not the petrol car, the induction stove, not the gas stove, we will hit maybe 2.7 degrees if we just accelerate this trend and maybe pay it forward a bit and invest in the cheaper a little bit earlier than when it's financially immediately cheaper. We can save the world. We can get into the 1.5 degree carbon budget, which is vital for all of us. So very excited to be here, and a big shout out to Electrify, Burundara and Lighter Footprints and all the groups who put this on. And if anyone knows philanthropists, Australians spend billions a year in philanthropy, which is wonderful. Imagine if 100 groups got $30,000 to do this. So groups around the country who maybe don't quite have the network of organised volunteers like you do in Burundara. Imagine 100 community events like this with 1,000 people coming through the door. This would be unstoppable. So reach out to your friends, Twiggy, Mike Cannon-Brooks, all the big donors you know. It's not much of an ask to save the world. So I'll stop there just to introduce my colleague Saul Griffith, who's not actually in Kyoto giving this talk this morning. He's moved on somewhere else, but this is a video. And then afterwards we'll have Alan Kohler, who you all know if you've ever watched the TV news or read the paper and wanted an economic opinion. And then a fantastic panel with Bruce Mountain and Jess Hunt, who are incredible experts for us to draw on. So I'll step aside and we'll hear from Saul, and then I'll intro, well, Alan can come to the stage. Thank you.
Good morning, Burundara. I'm Saul Griffith from Rewiring Australia, and I'm delighted to be here. Not quite, I'm in Kanazawa in Japan, but hopefully you'll also feel my presence there to help you electrify Burundara and launch your community's effort to rapidly decarbonise, lead the world, and help your community economically and in health benefits and in addressing the climate crisis we have. Congratulations, I'm not really helping very much, but hopefully I can say a few words to inspire and get you on your way. Here we are, Electrify Burundara. I think the words I want to say are pretty simple. I think we really need an antidote to climate anxiety. Everyone is very concerned. The emergency is real. We're seeing the weather events and the climate events in the news every day. But we need an antidote. We need something we can do that isn't just guilt. So we've made everyone feel urgency with the emergency. What do we do now? So I want you to hurry up, and we all need to make 6 good decisions over the next 15 years. And it really is, can be reduced to that. That's net zero 2038 ahead of our 1.5 degree climate targets. What are those 6 good decisions? Well, really, it's about electrifying everything. It's about electrifying every household, and it's about electrifying every small business and doing that within your community. And if all of our communities do that, that's how we get our country on track. One of those decisions is electrify your water heater, electric resistance with storage, or a heat pump. Far more efficient than what you're doing today, and that gets you on your journey. You need to buy clean electricity. That could come as rooftop solar, or zero emission electricity purchased from a retailer, or preferably you're doing both of those things. Electrify your heating systems. You can probably see one behind me. Reverse cycle air conditioning is perfect for Australian environments. It's also known as a heat pump. We also need to electrify our kitchens, convert your gas stove and your gas ovens to induction and electric, or half the amount of energy used, and improve the air quality in the kitchen. Electrify your vehicles. That expensive polluting petrol and diesel will give way to clean, quiet electrics that will also improve the air quality on the ground in your local community. And then we need to make all of that electrification smart. So that means adding batteries and good control systems that will coordinate the whole system and really enable you to live your life and make your home work for you on sort of set and forget. Set the general principles and set the control systems, and away it goes. You just go about living your life. And those smarts will coordinate our electrical system in our community and nationally. All of that is going to bring 60% less energy use to run your household. So these machines are just extraordinarily efficient compared to fossil fuels. So you'll be doing all of the same things. In fact, you'll be doing them better, all the while using 60% less energy. Going from a typical Australian household using 100 kilowatt hours of energy today for all of their energy uses down to only about 37 kilowatt hours per day. Or, in the 1980s advertising parlance, 60% off, all waste must go. Let's just do it. You'll also save thousands of dollars per year on the cost of your energy bills. This is another extraordinary artifact of the efficiency of these electric machines and the cheapness of Australian rooftop solar and the prolific renewables that we have out there on the grid. So whereas household energy costs rose from about $2,000 to almost $7,000 over the last 30 years, the ongoing cost of running an all-electric household will be about a third of that. It's thousands of dollars per saving per year, and we just got to use those savings to buy those machines, and then we'll lock in anti-inflationary electrification for decades to come. Don't forget to also do the little things. They're also important. Electric bikes, electric lawnmowers, electric garden tools, weatherproof your home when you're doing a renovation or buying or building a new home, improve your diet, and recycling. They're not the big things in terms of emissions, but they all make a difference. And then there's the non-technical things that may be some of the most important things about what an Electrify community project really is. And that's educating your neighbours, and I think that really needs to be done patiently, with a great deal of empathy, with love. We've got to overturn a lot of people's preconceptions of what this climate and energy transition looks like. So, have a loving conversation about heat pumps over the fence. We've got to educate the kids. I think this is honestly the most important thing we do. We need to spend our time generously with them, paint a picture of the future that they are participating in, that is optimistic, that shows that they are critical in this energy transition. They become the workforce that will execute this energy transition with and for us, or really us for them. Give them hope. Show them that they are the future we need. And maybe the most important of all, well, there's a lot of important things on this slide, but educate your politicians. They're probably going to be a little bit harder to educate than the kids and the neighbours. And if they prove uneducatable, then we need to vote in different ones. And that's true at local, at state, and at federal level, because we're really not going to get there unless we align government policy, regulations at all scales of government in Australia and around the world. And then there's the community things that you can do on the ground, and this is how you'll notice your community subtly changing as we fix this climate crisis. That's allowing and encouraging renewables in your community and transmission projects so that we not only have our rooftop solar, but we're getting the large scale connections we need to make it a 100% reliable energy system. It's about proliferation of community car chargers, so you're charging your car when you're at the IGA or when you're at Woolies or when you're at Bunnings or when you're parking at work for the day. It's about solar on the schools, it's about solar on your community buildings and on your small business buildings. It's about bulk purchasing discounts, so together your community can lower the cost of the project. It's also about mobility lanes for the profusion of new electric transport that'll make those last mile trips that much easier and more fun and cleaner. And it's about shared and public transport. So really we need a philosophy of fix it when it fails. So when your car kicks the bucket, your internal combustion engine, it can be replaced with an electric vehicle. It's about electrifying it when it ends. So when that water heater falls over, then it's time to replace it with the electric version that can be zero emission. And if we treat all of our machines in our life like that, when you're doing the kitchen renovation, that's a great time to install your electric kitchen. Collectively, we'll hit our climate targets and get our communities to cleaner air and zero emissions. I think about it as investing in the electric life infrastructure that permanently eliminates your emissions without you having to think about it every single minute of every single day. And by doing that, we eliminate the anxiety. We lock in the climate solutions into going about our daily lives. Here you go. I'm really excited that you're launching this effort, Electrify Warrandara. We need solutions in our suburbs, and you're doing it. We need every home to get on this electrification journey, and we need every community to join your community as a leader in this electrification journey. And I congratulate you on your work, and I wish you luck. We can do it individually in our communities and together. Thanks very much. Congratulations, Warrandara. I'm Saul Griffith from Rewiring Australia. Let's electrify everyone.
So if anyone has a nuclear-powered laptop for Alan's presentation, please come to the foyer with your magic unicorn. Alan needs no introduction. Alan Kohler, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Dan. It's great to be talking to my neighbours. I live just up the road. So I reckon Saul Griffiths is a hero and an inspiration. I mean, it's because he doesn't just write about global warming and pontificate about it as I do. He had a good business, technology business, and he decided to do something that was useful. So in 2017, he started Rewiring America. And 5 years later, that resulted in the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States that Joe Biden passed. $783 billion on climate change, a lot of it on subsidising households to switch from gas to electricity. And it was uncapped, right? And so what's happening now is that so many people, so many companies are taking advantage of it and so many households are taking advantage of it. Goldman Sachs now estimates that the amount that this is going to cost America is $1.2 trillion. So, look, I reckon community efforts like this here are fantastic, really worthwhile, but government is needed to make it really happen, in my view. I mean, note that Saul said in that thing towards the end there that when the appliance ends, when the car gets clapped out or the appliance needs replacing, then replace it with electricity. But that'll take too long, in my view. I think what's needed for government is to help and encourage us to do it fairly quickly. So that's why Saul moved back to Australia 2021 from California, and he started with Dan rewiring Australia. And then after the election last year, he started talking to Anthony Albanese and Chris Bowen. And in January, he and Dan made a pre-budget submission to the government, which proposed that the government fund household and business electrification and create some machinery of government to enable it. Right? So the government came up with $1.7 billion in the budget, which was mostly money moved from somewhere else, but at least it's there. $1 billion was moved from the Clean Energy Finance Corporation's Rewiring the Nation Fund for transmission and directed to Household Energy Upgrades and Household Energy Upgrades Fund, which is supposed to go to low and medium income households. $300 million allocated for social housing, $310 million, and also that's to be matched by the states. $310 million allocated to small business energy incentive, $100 million for local government electrification projects. So now they're working on household electrification finance policies with economists at the ANU. So I reckon all this is fantastic, and go Dan and Saul. But it's necessary because waiting until the appliances end is too slow. The cost curves for all the technologies will eventually bring them to parity with fossil fuel machines, but not fast enough for Australia to do our bit. The Australian equivalent of the IRA would be, as announced originally, would be $50 billion, not 1.7. The equivalent of the new estimate of the cost of the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, would be $80 billion. Now, it took Saul 5 years to persuade Joe Biden to do that. So on that basis, it'll be 2027 by the time he and Dan pull it off here, because they started, 2021, but really it was only started in 2022 when the government was elected. And that'll be 3 years before Albanese and Bowen have to get Australia's emissions down by 43%. Now, the cost of the energy transmission plus the cost of global warming itself is going to be enormous. Now, last year, on September the 8th last year, I wrote a column in the New Daily that started with this paragraph. Here's a crazy idea. Give the job of dealing with climate change to the Reserve Bank. Why? Well, because it's the only government body that's entirely independent of politics and the need to be popular, and it's pretty clear that political democracy is failing to deal with climate change. And second, the Reserve Bank can create money, which it did in the pandemic, you'll remember. I mean, the pandemic was a crisis. The Reserve Bank, just created colossal amounts of money and just pumped it into the economy to save the economy, as did the Federal Reserve in the US and basically every other central bank in the world. So I'm saying that the crisis that we're facing is every bit as real, just longer lasting, than COVID-19 pandemic. And the things that are needed by everybody, community and government and the Reserve Bank, is just as important and just as great. 2023 is on track to be the hottest year on record. We're up to 1.23 degrees of warming from the pre-industrial age by August, and September was really hot around the world. So some estimates are saying that we've already got to 1.4 degrees, or soon will be. We've got floods and fires going on all over the place, sometimes one after the other in consecutive days, as we had in Gippsland last week. We'll probably zoom past the Paris target of 1.5 degrees within a few years, heading to 2 degrees of warming. So 43% reduction, which is the government's target, is nowhere near enough and won't be achieved anyway. So according to the Climate Council, the world needs to be net zero by 2038. So there needs to be these sort of events all over the country, all the time, and the government needs to come in with a lot more money than it already has. And that's finance.
Hard act to follow. Superb. So I'm not going to speak much, but I will.
What? We move our chairs along.
Oh yeah, should we reshuffle a bit?
Water. Gosh, this is heavy.
All right. Well, thank you, Alan and Saul, over in, I think you might be in Korea now. So to introduce the others on the panel, Bruce Mountain, economist and engineer and director of the Victorian Energy Policy Centre at Victoria University, well known if you follow any of the intricate debates in energy. And then Jess Hunt at the State Department, here representing the Victorian government, who are doing fantastic work in the grid and then right down at the household level with, in particular, this gas substitution roadmap, which we'll hear a bit about, which is really the beginnings of a wholesale electrification plan. So I thought, Bruce, we might go to you first. We are in this climate crisis. There's a sense of great urgency. The climate scientists are particularly alarmed by the temperature anomalies this year and the big global systems that have flipped, El Nino and La Nina in the Pacific and the Indian Ocean dipole, which will mean drier and hotter conditions. Can you just give us a bit of a sense of what the urgency means, particularly in reference to gas? And what is gas? Why is it a problem in the short term for climate change? And why is there so much seemingly sudden action from governments just focusing on gas itself, including right down to the household level, which seems like a small thing?
Sure. Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I mean, every day that goes by, there seems to be more dire news, and it seems, if anything, the scientists who are expert in climate and climate systems seem to have understated the rate of change. So it's dire. Gas in household application in terms of your greenhouse gas footprint. For home heating is the main use, and for heating water, and then for cooking, is not the biggest greenhouse gas source of your footprint per se, but it's an important part. And it's important in consuming gas to be aware of the upstream implications of gas in its extraction. A good deal of our gas comes from the offshore, which are old sources, and not much of that gas leaks into the atmosphere, but more and more of our gas comes from coal seam methane, which is onshore, and a good deal of that leaks into the atmosphere. When that gas leaks into the atmosphere, its net effect on the actual warming is somewhere between 20 and 30 times greater than when the gas is burned. So it's not just your individual gas consumption, which when it's burned in your water heater is bad, but it's a good deal worse when it's not burned in your water heater. And the gas companies have done their level best to understate the extent of global warming through the gas leakage. This is a critically important problem, not least because a very great deal of our gas now comes from those areas. I think the other thing, generally speaking, even though it's not the biggest, it's one in which your switch over to it does not mean any loss to the utility that you enjoy. Your houses will be just as warm, your food will be just as good, your water will be just as hot. So these are transitions, even if you leave to one side that you'll be better off in an economic sense, these are transitions that are obvious and easy to make, that are in the global interest.
Great, thank you, Bruce. So Jessica, can you explain what is the Victorian gas substitution roadmap and what will that mean?
Sure. So I head up the Victorian Gas Substitution Roadmap update. What that is the first stage in our journey to decarbonising the gas sector. So here in Victoria, we have been blessed in a lot of ways to have the Gippsland Basin be able to supply a lot of plentiful, cheap gas in our past. And when you compare that with our coal-fired electricity system, it was also relatively cleaner to a degree. Having said that, our gas sector supplies 17% of our emissions in Victoria. And if we're going to meet net zero by 2045, which is what we're aiming for, we can't be using that much gas. We need to convert all of that gas to other sources of energy efficiency. So that could be weather sealing on your home, double glazing, etc. It could be electrification, or it could be renewable gases. The reality is, in your home, the cheapest and simplest thing for you to do is to electrify. And that is also going to make your wallet in your pocket a lot heavier. It is the cheapest thing for you to do.
Which is amazing. Sorry. So I thought I'd go then to the big picture economics of the climate challenge and the transition, and maybe go to you first, Alan. So obviously, it's always been economically rational in the big sense to make a transition off fossil fuels. If we keep using fossil fuels and the world gets warm beyond about 2 degrees, it's global chaos, which is not a good thing or a cheap thing. We can't sustain a civilization in a biosphere that can't sustain a global economy. But there's another dimension to this transition now, which is that fossil fuels are becoming more expensive than green fuels. It's a little complicated because it involves paying up front to switch infrastructure over. I just wondered if you could explore some of these themes and how it might relate to the kind of so-called climate wars, where one side of politics has found it a bit too challenging to say we should solve the problem, and both sides have found it fairly challenging. What does it mean that green is becoming cheaper than dirty?
I'll get to that in a moment, but I think it's worth just acknowledging, perhaps, how fantastic fossil fuels have been for civilization. From the moment really coal began, and then oil, and what sort of progress that resulted in. What that did was, for thousands of years, GDP per capita, the economic kind of dividend of life, basically stayed the same. And then all of a sudden, GDP per capita exploded because of fossil fuels, because human beings were able to convert so much more energy into output. And so obviously, and then cars came along. So what was created over the past 150 years was an enormous, tremendously important fossil fuel industry, including obviously plastics from the 50s onwards. So what happened was that those fossil fuel companies obviously were very powerful, enormously powerful, rich, and so when the challenge came upon them, they lobbied hard to prevent their profits going down, as you would. It's hardly surprising that they would do that, but what happened was that whereas in the 80s, when this was starting to get talked about, the conservative side of politics were all in favour of doing something about climate change, the fossil fuel lobby turned that around, and they managed to create this idea that the science wasn't proved. So, and the conservative side of politics was looking for a totem on which to dance around, and so they came up with this. So really it began, I think, with George W. Bush, and then obviously the Australian Conservatives fell into line and became sort of, I guess you'd say, hysterically opposed to action on climate change, which resulted in the repeal of our carbon trading system in 2014. And so that was a massive setback, which we've kind of half got going now with the safeguard mechanism proposal that's now the Labor government's got, but it isn't. They haven't gone back to what they had between 2012 and 2014. They've really kind of come up with a half-assed setup, which kind of will hopefully do it, but it's really, so I suppose what I'm saying is the politics of climate change are still really compromised, still really difficult. In the meantime, over the past sort of 10 or 20 years, the cost of solar PV cells has fallen enormously. So as Dan says, it's now cheaper to produce electricity renewably than through fossil fuels. But the fossil fuel lobby is still incredibly powerful. I read, I don't know if this is right, but I read something yesterday that the world has spent $4 trillion US going from 83% fossil fuels to 81% fossil fuels. And so my final point, I guess, is that this is largely a cost issue for governments. It's a cost issue for us. It's going to cost us a bit to chuck out the gas heater and put an electric one in. But mainly it's about governments in two ways. One is that they have to spend a lot of money to get this energy transition happening. And secondly, they're going to have to spend a lot of money dealing with the consequences of global warming, which are going to be enormous. They're already enormous. And, the temperature has nowhere near stopped rising. And so I think, I said before about, the COVID-19 pandemic, part of the problem is that the governments around the world have got enormous amounts of debt now because of the pandemic. They went into the pandemic with debt. Now the debt's exploded because of all the pandemic-related spending, and now they don't want to do anything. They're worried about spending more money, which is why I think we need to find some solution.
Yeah, look, that's great. Thank you, Alan. So the modelling that Saul did a couple of years ago, and others have followed with similar studies, indicates that by around 2030, if hypothetically all the households of Australia had electrified vehicle and household, the cost of energy and the financed purchase of those machines, including the cars, would represent a saving in the realm of 30 billion a year, which is extraordinary. So roughly 30 billion a year in savings if the whole country could electrify. But of course the challenge is that a lot of people don't have the capital to make that investment, even if over the lifetime of the asset it's cheaper. And indeed, the Grattan Institute published a fantastic report recently suggesting that only 40% of households can avail themselves of this financial boon to themselves. And the reason it's so low is that's owner-occupiers who already have the capital to invest or borrow. So, Bruce, I wonder if I might turn to you. Does this mean we can't get there? How do we put this in context, thinking about the challenge Alan says that governments should be funding this transition? We pay for roads over the course of using them, and hospitals and ports, and goodness knows battleships. We don't have to all dip in our pocket our share of hundreds of billions of dollars. How can we possibly finance this transition as a society? What might that look like?
Yeah, okay. So I think this is a very deep and problematic issue. The world is unfair. Wealth is not even across the population anywhere. Rich people are able to afford opportunities that give them benefits. And that's true in climate change. EVs, switching over to power-based devices, as we know and as has been said many times, and it's been known for quite some time, is a private benefit. Your electricity bill goes up much less than your gas bill actually goes down. Yes, that's right. And so you can get a private gain by switching over. And so wealthier people who can afford it get that private gain. That is a problem, and it is a reality. And it's a problem that government alone can deal with. I would argue not by stopping the transition amongst wealthier people, but by looking for ways to ensure that people who are less well off can access the change. I think it's important to be mindful of the fact that about a third of our population live in housing stock for whom gas switchover is not something they can make a choice themselves. It's part of a building structure. And so government needs to assist in the transition for those buildings, and they need to ensure that a grid exists in some form to ensure that centrally produced electricity, which is clean, can actually get to them. So to Alan's point and Saul's point, government is intrinsic to a lot of the transition. I sense often governments feel quite perturbed about the wealth implications of actually cleaning up our power system and our own use. As well they might. There are distributional challenges with this. Many of us in this room can afford to finance or pay outright for the change. I did a detailed study for the Victorian government about 3 years ago now, which looked into the effect of switching off gas supply in the networks by 2030, 40 and 50, what would be the financial implications on the industry and on customers. And I did various modelling of which the economic benefit was obvious. It was so obvious that to me, once I'd finished the study, I snipped the gas supply to my house and ensured that I was not going to actually face that anymore. That was an easy choice for me. For many, that's not possible. I, through my actions, have brought about a common good. There's been a private good. My bill's gone down. But there are many of us who have that opportunity, but there are many that don't. And so it's up to government not to slow the transition down amongst those who can make the change, but to address the issue for those that can't. And governments are very mindful of this. They're very aware of it, but it is a very, very difficult public policy issue.
Great, thank you. So just to put in context what Victoria's doing, as Alan said, the federal government, which has the most money because of the way taxation is managed in this country, has put down $1.7 billion for electrification. Victoria already had a 10-year, $1.5 billion budget in Solar Victoria. So Victoria is doing quite incredible work here. Jess, can you explain a little about the funding that's been made available, but also what are the actual financial savings for the households who can use the subsidies to start that electrification journey?
Sure. So Solar Victoria is obviously a very big program that we have here in Victoria that we're very proud of. And what that can give you as households is around $1,400 towards a solar system to be installed in your home, around $1,000 for a hot water heat pump, and loans for solar batteries if you are an eligible household. So that's one really great incentive that we have to help people make that switch. The other program the Victorian government has is the Victorian Energy Upgrades program. So by switching your gas heater to a reverse cycle air conditioner, the amount of money you can claim through that program varies depending on the size and the type of the system, but ranges from about $490 to about $2,200. So that works as sort of a discount at the point of sale. And on your hot water system, it's around about $490 for switching from gas to electricity. Now those don't sound like a lot, I am aware of that, but as we've heard, all of this is very complicated. There's a lot of interlinking factors between everything, and it is a challenge to make sure we balance those things to make sure that that money's going where it's needed to.
Great. And look, there are other benefits to making the transition, so I thought maybe we'll just go to those briefly. So obviously we have a concern for the future and the world and the public benefit of getting off dirty fossil fuels, and there's a hip pocket benefit. But what are some of the other issues that are thrown up by the transition, and how can we manage them, such as the reliability of the grid, also the international implications of importing fossil fuels from parts of the world that are often in conflict or occasionally in catastrophic conflict? I mean, what are some of the other benefits of this transition? And also right down to the household level, what is the impact of using gas in a house, whether it's burned or leaked? So maybe we'll start with Jess and then we can move across the panel. There's a lot more here than only climate change or your hip pocket.
Yeah, there is. So I'll speak to the hip pocket first. So switching your gas heating appliances to electrification, firstly, your electric appliances are a lot more efficient than your gas appliances. So you can save about $570 a year by switching your heating. If you extend that to your hot water, there's an additional $170. And if you then switch over your cooking, there's an additional $270 when you take into the fact that you can then disconnect from the gas system completely. So there's no more daily connection charge. By putting solar on your house, you can save an additional $1,000 on top of that. So that's quite a substantial amount of money. But what I want to say as well is those numbers are from before we just had the recent price increases. So the savings are much higher today than I've just laid out. And as prices increase in future, they will get higher and higher and higher again. Climate change, I'm going to share a personal anecdote. Most of you would have seen the Bryagalong fires in the news this week. I'm actually from Bryagalong. So for me, the climate change, it really hits home. I want my kids to be able to enjoy the same things in life that I've been able to enjoy. And that's what it boils down to for me, really.
Yeah, great point, Jess.
So other than dollars and cents for yourself and public benefit, what else is there to switching away from gas? For me, it's less appliances to maintain, less to worry about in the house. I kind of like energy efficiency per se. I know it's not an entirely rational thing because energy and mass are interrelated and energy is infinite, but I kind of like getting more from less. And electrical appliances, heat pumps, extract a third of the energy, or actually, for each unit of power that goes into them, 3 times more useful heat actually comes out of them. And that's just really neat. So I love the fact that the energy consumption is so much lower. It's kind of cleaner air, of course, a simpler life, being mindful that the gas appliances we have they've evolved over time and they've become super efficient too in their own way, but they had to have a whole lot of policy going into them. There's a whole lot of policy that made that happen for households in Victoria. And I don't like a lot of the companies that sell that produce. I don't find them particularly honest in their business dealings. And I'm very mindful of global gas issues, and most notably Russia, a pivotal gas supplier. So decreasing and getting rid of gas consumption gets me out of that dirty industry. I'm now not yet at the EV stage, but I've got one on order, and I'm soon going to be able to drastically decrease my private motoring. And I feel I'm decreasing the reign of those nasty companies who generally have had a whole lot of private gain at the public cost. So all of that makes me feel good, smug at the worst of times, but good. So anyway, that's all part of my journey.
And look, the Australian gas companies are terrible companies. They're a cartel. There aren't enough of them. I mean, the thing about electricity is there's tons of them. There's so much more competition in electricity than there is in gas. So that's one other thing to bear in mind. I also think that there needs to be some focus on batteries to transfer the power from the daytime when the sun's out to the nighttime, because at the moment we're still using 60% of the energy in the evenings, possibly more, is from coal. It gets up to 70% solar in the middle of the day, but we need to smooth that out. And I think the government probably has a role here as well. I think that the subsidies need to be perhaps shifted a bit from helping pay for panels to helping pay for batteries, both household batteries and community batteries. And the other thing, I mean, Bruce might know about more about this than me, but it seems to me that virtual net metering is a good idea, where people who live in apartment buildings can be a part of a solar array somewhere else, and the electricity that's generated, because they haven't got a roof, or maybe there's not enough of a roof, they can't put it on the roof, and anyway they're in an apartment, not a house. But if they could put a solar array on a factory, a local factory, and get the benefit of the electricity that is generated, which offsets their own bills. And that is going on to some extent, but it needs to happen a lot more. Is that right? Was I?
Just the key thing is the physical power production. Cleaning up the power production from the wind and the sun, i.e. moving to the wind and the sun, is a critical thing. Virtual net metering can be a way to incentivise and allow households in buildings who don't have access to the roof space for their own panels, and landlords and rental and so on, to be able to implicitly access that capacity. It is an intellectual construct. The critical thing is that you get the solar and the wind in to make the electricity. But yes, it gives those incentives. Again, a critical role for government. Without government, a whole lot of that virtual net metering idea can't happen properly.
So are you doing this, Jess?
So I work in the gas team. Having said that, my colleagues in the distributed energy resources team are absolutely looking at all of this. So the neighbourhood battery initiative that is due to sort of commence and come out this year is looking at exactly those sorts of things. So if we can harness the solar that we have on everybody's roofs and feed that into batteries, then we can feed that back out into the grid. But how do we do that equitably? You know, if that battery is located here in Boroondara, then the people of Boroondara benefit from it. But there are other people who may not be as economically well off as the people here in Boroondara, so they might not have the ability to do that. It's how do we balance all of those various things to make sure that these benefits are shared equitably across the community.
Great. All right, well, let's go to the floor. There's 2 roving mics. I think we'll take 2 questions at a time, and then we can bank them up and organise the answers. So one there and one here.
Hello. I was just wondering, Australia pays the fossil fuel companies an awful lot of money in subsidies. That's us paying the fossil fuel companies a lot in subsidies. Can we get that money and take it from them and put it into the transition?
Great question. Let's get the other one too, and we can... Yeah.
Ken Parker. I just wondered if you could compare the cost that you said is enormous for the government to do the various things, these subsidies and so on, with the cost of not doing it, because some people don't really take any notice unless you actually slap them in the face with the real numbers. And are they aware of the enormous cost of not acting?
Yeah, great questions. Look, can I actually answer that? Because I was thinking when I was listening to the panel before, the first time I read a credible study that looked at the total cost of the energy transition, so the overnight cost, as the economists sometimes say, of building a dam versus a nuclear power plant, but then the whole operational lifetime cost, operating and maintaining and paying for fuel in one system or free energy in the other. And the first studies that really looked at this were about 2004 or 5, I think, from memory. One was by the Fraunhofer, the German kind of space agency and a university think tank in Germany. And then soon after, the International Energy Agency came up with similar figures. In both cases, it was cheaper to transition. Even on 2005 cost curves for solar and batteries and EVs, the global cost of the lifetime cost of owning, operating, and in the fossil fuel case, fueling, the whole energy system was going to be cheaper at 100% renewables than business as usual. And just think about that a little bit, because it's a stunning figure. I mean, Saul is saying soon we'll be there in electrification, that it'll be cheaper to do everything yourself with your hip pocket. But the economic cost is the total cost. And this isn't even the total climate cost. This is literally just the system operation and maintenance and construction and finance cost. So 25 years ago, this was evident. The only way you can stop a fact as compelling as that is fossil fuel lobbying and misinformation, as Alan said. I mean, that is a fact so compelling. You can't knock over facts that big without a hell of a lot of effort and self-interest. So great question about the economics, and then fossil fuel subsidies. Who would like, they're both juicy questions, to jump in first?
The biggest element of our fossil fuel subsidy, of the suite of fossil fuel subsidies that we make available to producers as well as to customers, is not a subsidy for consumption, it's a foregone tax. We don't tax coal extraction and gas extraction, either in terms of the rents produced or in terms of the social implications of their extraction, anywhere near its economic cost. Sadly, that's the reality in Australia, and it's been like that for yonks. I wish we would tax far more effectively like they do in Norway the resources that we extract, of which fossil fuels are critical, and utilise that funding for the public benefit. But alas, we don't, and it's in the hands of the people to democratically elect parties who will change that. That's a fiscal thing for Australia and for its people, but the greenhouse gas is a global impact, of which the effects are felt most keenly by people who are not well off in our own country, as even more so in other countries. And there's a distribution of cost and benefit. The losses actually go to them. The gains from using fossils in the short term are actually for us. But now we can get a gain because of technology change from decarbonising our household use. So unfortunately, again, it's the wealth effect and the distribution of gains and losses. That's the reality. And to Alan and Saul's point again, and Jess, government's at the heart of it. We can do what we can, and we must, and we get private benefits from it. But we must also agitate for policies and for governments that think of the common good.
I keep wondering when the panic button will get hit, because it hasn't been hit yet. I mean, certain people are, like the President of the United Nations, or the Governor General, Mr. Gutierrez, who says that we're in a global boiling. He's been making speeches that are, extremely urgent, and some people are. Twiggy Forrest, sure, that's right. He made you can Google Twiggy's speech. It's quite a serious effort. But the governments generally are not hitting the panic button. And the question I've been wondering and writing about is, what does the panic button look like? What happens? Because at some point, I would think, it'll become blatantly obvious that the humanity's in trouble. And at that point, the governments that don't hit the panic button will get voted out, I imagine. But so far, we're not there.
Well, it's a tragically problematic problem, because we can insulate ourselves in our private lives from its worst effects. And we, by and large, have the means to do that. But we can't seldom think beyond our lifetime or our children's lifetime, and it's the broader societal and economic impacts on the environment. And the head of the UN and the IEA and private business people can demand a change. People can insulate themselves over their lifetime and their children's lifetime, but we humans are not terribly good at thinking terribly much beyond that.
Well, yes, I wonder. Two more questions?
Yes, thank you very much. Just a question. We're trying to decarbonise our lifestyles effectively so we stop global warming. And one of the things that Saul mentioned about was we need to educate our politicians. One of the things I've seen more recently, and I have to declare I'm anti-nuclear. However, there's been a lot of discussion about using small modular reactors. I know they're not yet developed, but what does the panel think about? Have they got something to do in this discussion?
Well, that's come up because, you probably got a view, but that's come up because the coalition's been grasping around for a policy, and the only one they can come up with is modular nuclear, and that's their only climate change policy.
Yeah, and look, just to be clear, given the time it takes to create the infrastructure, build the projects, get the technology, and overcome the other constraints, it's not going to happen on the kind of timeline we need to act. And in fact, if you'd really wanted to do this, the time to do it probably would have been when the Liberals were in power. If you'd had an accelerated nuclear, truly training and development and skills program, maybe we might have had an industry ready by 2030, 35, but not from here.
So there's a lot of discussion as to the rate of progress of nuclear and its future prospects. I've gone into the electricity economics and the electricity system to try to understand the scope of nuclear, which is essentially a baseload technology, which means it costs a great deal to make, and you need to have it operating pretty much flat out so that economically it makes sense. 2/3 of electricity in some of our regions and 1/3 here comes from the wind and sun as an annual average, which means there are many times during many days in the week and weekends and autumn and spring when the wind and sun is meeting 90% plus of our power, and that's growing fast, which leaves a non-wind and sun demand, because when the wind's blowing, the sun's shining, power's free, so it always gets used then. But those times when the wind and sun are not there vary. They go up and they go down. And there's short windows, and that window gets ever shorter. And that leaves no scope for a baseload technology like coal or nuclear or gas. So it's even less of a nuclear per se. It's a question of the technology mix. The mix we need with wind and sun dominating is a storage technology. Batteries and hydro that can shift electricity from one point in time to the other. And for that reason, leaving aside whatever you think of nuclear and its prospects, and it just has no future in the same way that coal and gas have no meaningful future.
Great. Well, look, we're almost out of time. Do you have one more question? Great. One more. I've been told by the boss.
Thanks very much, and thanks to the organisers for a great day and a great panel. I'm interested that nobody has talked about the fact that in terms of us getting our carbon budget under control, the fact that Australia is, what are we, the second or the third largest exporter of fossil fuels, and the fracking that's already underway in the Beetaloo Basin will completely swamp any reductions that we've made in our emissions in the process of extraction and production, as well as its use when it's exported to other countries that are not as advanced on the electrification journey.
Yeah, so fossil fuel exports are our big footprint. The other big footprint is what we do globally to frustrate and sabotage climate progress. So our big toxic exports are the carbon and the misinformation and the obstructionism. For 25 years, Australia has been a bad faith actor in the globe, and that's one of the reasons why we're at the state we're at. And they're causally connected. There's a great paper from Foreign Affairs last year by Alan Boehm and some others who talked about it. The reason why we have such a bad record on climate diplomacy is so we can sell carbon. It's absolutely causally related. There is no hesitation or doubt in drawing to that conclusion. That's the biggest thing we have to change. At the moment, neither major party will go anywhere near there. There's absolutely no chance either of them will go anywhere. So how do we get there? I don't know. My hunch, my theory of change is if we can rapidly decarbonise our grid and our lifestyles, we then potentially can open that argument with governments and the business elites who really set economic policy about stopping to sell this thing because we're not using it. But while we're using it, while our grid is 3/4 coal and gas, realistically, how are we even going to mount the argument to stop selling these things to the rest of the world, even though they come back as bushfires, as floods, as famines, as wars that destabilise the economy? So I think that this actually is the heart of the solution, communities, because I hear what Alan and Bruce are saying about government being the ultimate decision maker, 100%. It's a social problem. But the constraint there, is it a lack of information? Is it a lack of expertise? The one thing lacking in Canberra and Macquarie Street and Spring Street and Wall Street, or Washington Avenue and everywhere where there's a government, the one critical thing missing is courage. It's the only actual thing that can change the situation. Then the economics will flow and the engineering is ready, as Bruce and the others have explained. The only place to get the courage is from you. You are 100% the solution. In the end, at the second order, governments will do it and build the machinery and print the money at the Reserve Bank, hopefully. But none of that happens until you solve this problem locally and make sure that the politics is 100% pedal to the floor, as they say, insane mode electrification. So thank you so much, Electrify Burundara and Lighter Footprints. Thank you everyone who's come here. Thank you to you all for the conversations you'll have with your neighbours across the fence and to your politicians and to your kids. It absolutely is the thing that will save the world, so do not stop and keep going. And come to us at any point if you need more information. Rewiring Australia is online. We have a website and Twitter, and we're a very small organisation. As big as Saul's stature seems to be, it's just a handful of us, but we're there with your heart and soul, so thank you.